Teacher expels poor farmer's son. The next day, a helicopter shocks the school. Ethan Parker never quite fit in at Crestwood Academy. From the moment he stepped onto its pristine grounds, he knew he was different. The school, a prestigious institution boasting marble hallways and manicured gardens, catered to students whose parents were CEOs, politicians, and socialites. Ethan, on the other hand, came from a long line of farmers. His life was measured in sunrise shifts and soil-stained hands, not black-tie galas and luxury vacations. Every morning before school, Ethan woke before dawn. While most of his classmates were still nestled in silk sheets, he was out in the barn, pulling on his worn-out boots and feeding the horses. He would collect eggs from the chicken coop, stack bales of hay, and check the irrigation lines running through the fields. The farm was more than land to him. It was home. It was legacy. It was a place where hard work mattered more than titles, where his grandfather's calloused hands told a story of perseverance. By the time Ethan arrived at school, his hands were scrubbed clean, but the scent of earth and hay always lingered, no matter how hard he tried to wash it away. It clung to him like an invisible brand, setting him apart from the others. The students at Crestwood, dressed in perfectly pressed uniforms and arriving in sleek black town cars, had little in common with him. Their lives were spent in penthouses, country clubs, and private tennis lessons. Ethan's world was dirt roads and honest work. Theirs was privilege and prestige. At first, he had tried to ignore the divide, tried to blend in, but it was impossible. They noticed everything: the way his uniform was a little more faded than theirs, how his shoes had scuff marks from real use, unlike their pristine loafers that never touched grass. How he brought simple homemade lunches wrapped in brown paper while they ate catered meals from expensive restaurants. It wasn't long before the whispers started. "Did you see his shoes? I swear they're secondhand. I heard his family still uses a well for water. How medieval. I bet he smells like cows all the time." He tried to ignore them, tried to keep his head down. He knew his grandfather would tell him not to let their words get to him, that real strength came from within. But knowing that and feeling that were two different things. One morning, as he stepped onto campus, a voice rang out behind him. "Hey, farm boy!" Ethan clenched his jaw but kept walking, his fists curled at his sides, nails digging into his palms. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. He had learned the hard way that answering back only made things worse. Laughter followed him across the schoolyard. "Just get to class," he told himself. Ignore them. But no matter how much he tried to act like their words didn't matter, each one left a small wound, an invisible scar on his heart. He was Ethan Parker, the farmer's grandson, the outcast, the boy who didn't belong. Yet nothing could have prepared him for what happened in Mr. Thornton's history class. Mr. Thornton was the kind of teacher who demanded perfection and tolerated nothing less. He was a man of sharp lines. His neatly pressed suit, his meticulous handwriting on the board, the cold precision of his words. There was no room for mistakes in his classroom, and certainly no room for students who struggled to keep up. Ethan had always found history fascinating, the way the past shaped the present, the stories of resilience and courage. But fascination alone wasn't enough. Mr. Thornton's assignments required rigorous analysis, polished arguments, and a depth of understanding that Ethan simply didn't have the time to perfect. Between his early morning farm chores and the exhaustion that followed him into the night, history essays became another weight dragging him down. He tried. He really did. But trying wasn't enough for Mr. Thornton. And today, Ethan would pay the price. The classroom was silent, except for the rhythmic scratching of pens against paper. The smell of chalk dust lingered in the air. Ethan sat in the middle row, hoping to blend into the background. But as Mr. Thornton flipped through the stack of graded essays on his desk, his eyes landed on one in particular. He exhaled sharply. Ethan knew it was his. Ethan Parker. The sound of his name was like a hammer striking metal, sharp, echoing. "Stand up." Ethan's heart pounded. He could feel every pair of eyes in the room shift toward him as he rose to his feet, his legs stiff with tension. His throat felt tight. Mr. Thornton picked up a paper from his desk, holding it delicately between two fingers as if it were something dirty. The sight of the familiar, crumpled page made Ethan's stomach twist. This the teacher announced, waving the essay in the air, is what you consider your best work. Ethan felt his cheeks burn. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. He knew the paper wasn't perfect, but he had stayed up late finishing it after helping his grandfather repair a broken fence. He had tried. Mr. Thornton didn't care. The teacher sighed, loud and exaggerated, shaking his head as if he were personally offended by the ink on the page. It's riddled with errors, lacks depth, and shows an embarrassing lack of effort. He turned his piercing gaze on Ethan. Tell me, Ethan, did you spend all night rolling in the hay instead of studying? Laughter rippled through the room. It started as a few muffled chuckles, but soon more students joined in. Some tried to suppress their amusement, casting quick glances at Ethan before looking away. Others, those who had always seen Ethan as an outsider, laughed openly, their eyes filled with quiet malice. Ethan swallowed hard. He didn't move, he didn't speak. But he felt something inside him, something fragile, begin to crack. Mr. Thornton wasn't done. He placed the essay back on his desk with a theatrical grimace, as if even touching it was beneath him. Then, fixing Ethan with a look of detached cruelty, he said, "Perhaps you should consider whether you truly belong at Crestwood Academy." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The laughter died down. Even those who usually joined in the teasing shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Maybe they hadn't expected him to go that far. Maybe even they knew that this was something different, something crueler than the usual taunts. But Mr. Thornton wasn't finished. Hard work is commendable, Ethan, he continued, but education isn't about dirt and sweat. It's about intellect. Maybe your family should have thought about that before sending you here. Silence. A cold, hollow silence filled the room, pressing down on Ethan like a weight he couldn't shake off. He could barely breathe. His hands clenched so tightly at his sides that his fingernails dug into his palms. He wanted to say something, to argue, to tell Mr. Thornton that he was wrong. That hard work did matter. That intelligence wasn't reserved for the privileged. But the words never came. They were stuck, buried under layers of humiliation and exhaustion. His classmates said nothing. No one spoke up. No one defended him. They just stared, some with pity, some with discomfort, some with quiet amusement. The moment stretched on. Then, just like that, it was over. Mr. Thornton turned away, dismissing Ethan as easily as one might brush away dust. "Sit down," he said, already moving on. "Class, open your textbooks to page 87. Ethan lowered himself back into his chair, his heart still hammering in his chest. His vision blurred slightly, but he refused to let himself blink. He wouldn't cry. Not here. Not now. But inside, something had shattered. That afternoon, Ethan sat alone on the bus ride home, staring out the window as the golden fields blurred past him. Normally, those fields brought him comfort. They reminded him of home, of warmth, of the quiet strength of the land. But today they felt distant. Mr. Thornton's words echoed in his mind. Maybe a farm is a better place for you than a classroom. Education isn't about dirt and sweat. Perhaps you should consider whether you truly belong. Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat. For the first time, he wondered if Mr. Thornton was right. For the first time, he felt the smallest seed of doubt take root in his chest. And it terrified him. The sky was painted in deep hues of orange and purple as Ethan trudged up the gravel driveway to his grandfather's farmhouse. The sun was setting behind the rolling fields, casting long shadows across the land. Normally, this time of day brought a quiet sense of peace. It was the time when the cows settled in, when the wind carried the scent of hay, and when the world seemed to slow down. But today, there was no peace in Ethan's heart. His boots felt heavier than usual, every step dragging as if the weight of the afternoon still clung to him. The sting of humiliation had not faded. If anything, it had settled deeper, like a bruise beneath the skin. As he reached the barn, he saw William Parker, Grandpa Bill, hard at work. The old man stood by the fence, his hands steady as he mended a broken section of wood. His weathered face was lined with wisdom and hard work, but his posture still carried the strength of a man who had spent his life building something real. His hat was tilted low against the sun, and his sleeves were rolled up, revealing arms thick with muscle despite his age. He looked up as Ethan approached. "Hey there, kiddo," Grandpa Bill greeted, setting down his hammer. His voice was warm, but his sharp eyes didn't miss the slump of Ethan's shoulders. "You're home early. Something on your mind?" Ethan hesitated. A part of him wanted to brush it off, to say, "It's nothing," and move on. But the weight of the day was too much. He had held it in for hours, and the moment he saw the concern in his grandfather's eyes, something inside him cracked. So he told him everything. The history class, the cruel words, the way Mr. Thornton had waved his essay like it was garbage, how he had mocked him, mocked their family, their way of life, like it was something to be ashamed of. Ethan's voice wavered at times, but he forced himself to get through it. He needed Grandpa Bill to understand just how much it had hurt, and his grandfather listened. Not once did he interrupt. He didn't rush to speak or dismiss Ethan's feelings. He simply stood there, arms crossed, his face growing darker with each word. The only sound was the distant rustling of the trees and the occasional lowing of a cow in the field. When Ethan finally fell silent, the old man let out a slow, measured breath. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, his jaw tightening, he spoke. "That man doesn't know a damn thing about real worth." The quiet anger in his voice made Ethan look up. His grandfather's expression was unreadable, but there was fire in his eyes, a fire Ethan had rarely seen. Ethan swallowed. "It doesn't matter, Grandpa. Maybe he's right. Maybe I don't belong there." Grandpa Bill's head snapped toward him so fast that Ethan took a step back. "Now you listen to me, son." His voice was firm, but not unkind. He stepped forward and placed both hands on Ethan's shoulders, grounding him. "Never, never, let anyone tell you your worth is measured by the dirt on your hands." Ethan looked down, his throat tightening. But his grandfather wasn't finished. "What we do, what our family has done for generations, is honest work. Hard work. We grow food that feeds people. We tend to the land and we take care of our own. There is nothing shameful about that." Ethan swallowed hard. He wanted to believe those words. He really did. But Mr. Thornton's voice still echoed in his mind, whispering doubts, making him question everything. Seeing the uncertainty in his grandson's face, Grandpa Bill sighed. His hands slid from Ethan's shoulders, but his gaze remained firm. People like Thornton, people who think respect comes from money or fancy degrees, forget what really keeps the world turning. They sit in their polished offices and classrooms, looking down on the very people who make their lives possible. You think he grows his own food, fixes his own roof when it leaks, builds anything with his own two hands? Ethan shook his head. Exactly. Grandpa Bill's voice softened, just a little. The problem ain't with you, Ethan. It's with men like him. Men who think kindness is weakness, who think respect is something you inherit instead of something you earn. Ethan wanted to believe him. He really did. But the humiliation still clung to him like a second skin. But what if he's right, he whispered. What if I really don't belong there? Grandpa Bill's eyes softened. He reached up and ruffled Ethan's hair the way he used to when Ethan was younger. You belong anywhere you damn well choose to belong, kiddo. His voice was quiet now, but no less powerful. You've got a brain in that head of yours, and you've got grit in your bones. Ain't a soul on this earth who can tell you where you do or don't belong. Ethan wanted to believe that. He wanted it so badly it hurt. But before he could respond, Grandpa Bill straightened, rolling his shoulders as if he had just made up his mind about something. And if that teacher of yours thinks he can shame you for where you come from, well, a slow, knowing smile crept onto his weathered face. Then maybe it's time I had a little chat with Mr. Thornton. Ethan's head shot up. Grandpa, no. But his grandfather just patted his shoulder, his eyes twinkling with something fierce. Don't you worry, kiddo, he said with a grin. I've got this. And for the first time all day, Ethan felt something other than humiliation. He felt hope. The next morning, Ethan arrived at school with an anxious weight pressing down on his chest. He had barely slept the night before. Every time he closed his eyes, his grandfather's words replayed in his mind. Then maybe it's time I had a little chat with Mr. Thornton. Ethan had tried to talk him out of it. Begged him, even. He didn't want any more trouble. He didn't want more eyes on him. He had suffered enough embarrassment for one lifetime, and he couldn't imagine how much worse it would be if his grandfather stormed into the school demanding a conversation. But Grandpa Bill had only smiled in that quiet, knowing way of his and said, "Trust me, kiddo." And that was that. Now, as Ethan walked through the hallways of Crestwood Academy, he felt like 1,000 invisible hands were pushing him forward, deeper into the unknown. He had no idea what his grandfather was planning, but his gut told him that whatever it was, it wouldn't go unnoticed. And that terrified him. He kept his head down through the morning routine. The other students barely paid him any mind today, too wrapped up in their own worlds of gossip and upcoming tests. No one knew what had happened yesterday in Mr. Thornton's class, except for the students who had witnessed it. And while some had looked uncomfortable in the moment, none of them had reached out afterward. Ethan was used to that. He was used to being alone. By the time first period began, he was sitting at his desk in history class, trying to focus on the words in his textbook, but they blurred together. His mind kept drifting, his nerves buzzing under his skin. Then it happened. At first, it was distant, a faint thump, thump, thump in the air, like the beating of an enormous drum. Students glanced around, eyebrows raised. The sound grew louder. Thump, thump, thump. The windows rattled slightly. A few students leaned toward them, trying to see what was causing the noise. Then someone gasped. "Oh my God!" A girl near the window pressed her hands to the glass. "There's a helicopter landing outside!" The entire class turned toward the windows at once. Whispers broke out, murmurs of curiosity and confusion rippling through the students. Even Mr. Thornton, who had just begun writing on the chalkboard, stopped mid-sentence. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He didn't need to look. He already knew. His grandfather's helicopter, sleek silver and emblazoned with the bold letters Parker Farms Limited, descended onto the school's pristine soccer field. The wind from the rotors sent loose leaves spiraling through the air, rustling the neatly trimmed grass, sending waves of dust into the sky. It was a sight so surreal, so completely out of place in the pristine world of Crestwood Academy, that for a moment, no one knew how to react. Then the entire school exploded into motion. Students rushed to the windows, pressing their faces against the glass. Some jumped from their seats, craning their necks to get a better look. The muffled roar of excited voices filled the classroom, drowning out the usual quiet. A boy in the front row turned to Ethan, his eyes wide. "Dude, is that your helicopter?" Ethan's stomach twisted. His mouth was dry. Before he could answer, the helicopter's door swung open, and out stepped Grandpa Bill. If the helicopter had been a spectacle, his grandfather was something even more astonishing. He wasn't wearing a suit like most of the fathers who occasionally visited the school. He wasn't dressed like a businessman or a politician. No, he wore his usual sturdy farm boots, a flannel shirt rolled up to his elbows, and a rugged jacket that had seen years of hard work. The contrast between his worn, practical clothing and the sleek, powerful helicopter behind him was striking. And yet, he looked completely at ease, as if he belonged there. The students were whispering now, the excitement reaching a fever pitch. Teachers who had been holding morning lessons stepped out of their classrooms, peering curiously through the halls toward the field. The principal, Ms. Alvarez, had appeared at the entrance, her brow furrowed as she tried to make sense of the situation. Ethan sat frozen in his seat. This was it. His grandfather was here. For him. From the front of the room, Mr. Thornton's face had gone pale. He turned slowly from the window, clearing his throat, trying to regain his composure. This is highly inappropriate, he stammered, straightening his tie. He glanced toward Ethan, as if realizing, too late, that the boy in the back of the room was the reason for all of this. Then, as if on cue, Grandpa Bill locked eyes with Mr. Thornton. From all the way across the field, through the window, there was no mistaking the direct, unwavering gaze. The intensity in Grandpa Bill's face sent a ripple of tension through the air. Then, loud and clear, his voice rang out. "Mr. Thornton!" Silence fell. Students stopped whispering. Teachers turned toward the field, confused but intrigued. The history teacher swallowed hard. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice sharper now, but lacking its usual authority. He was trying to regain control of the room, but there was something in the way Grandpa Bill stood, steady, unshaken, that made it impossible to dismiss him. The older man didn't hesitate. With the calm confidence of someone who had nothing to prove, he strode forward, cutting across the field, boots crunching against the grass. When he reached the edge of the gathering crowd, he stopped. His eyes scanned the sea of faces, landing back on Mr. Thornton. Then he spoke. "I believe you and I need to have a word about my grandson." The entire school had gathered. Students lined the edges of the field, their whispers hushed as the reality of the moment settled in. Teachers stood at a distance, their arms crossed, uncertainty flickering across their faces. The principal, Miss Alvarez, remained at the front of the crowd, her eyes sharp with curiosity as she observed the scene unfolding, and at the center of it all stood Grandpa Bill. He didn't need a podium or a microphone. He didn't need to raise his voice or put on a show. His presence alone was enough. Ethan had never seen him like this before. His grandfather had always been strong, strong in a way that didn't need words. A man who let his actions speak louder than anything. But today, standing before an entire school, his words would carry the weight of a lifetime of wisdom. And everyone, including Mr. Thornton, was about to hear them. Grandpa Bill stepped forward, his boots pressing into the soft grass. His eyes locked onto Mr. Thornton, unyielding. "Yesterday," he began, his voice steady but firm, "you humiliated my grandson in front of his peers. You judged him not by his efforts, not by his character, but by where he comes from." A thick silence hung in the air. "That, sir," Grandpa Bill continued, "was a mistake." A ripple of energy passed through the crowd. Some students exchanged glances. Others looked down, as if realizing, maybe for the first time, the depth of what had happened. Mr. Thornton straightened his posture, his usual confidence faltering. "Mr. Parker, I assure you." But Grandpa Bill raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. It wasn't a gesture of rudeness, nor of arrogance. It was simply a man who had something to say and wasn't going to be interrupted. "Respect," Grandpa Bill said, his voice carrying across the entire field, "isn't measured by wealth." He turned, his gaze sweeping across the students. "It's measured by integrity, by kindness, by the willingness to work hard and never give up." He let the words settle, his presence alone commanding their attention. "Ethan Parker is one of the hardest working kids I know. He wakes up at dawn to help run a farm, then comes here to try and build a future for himself. And if you can't see that, Mr. Thornton, then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong in a classroom." A stunned silence followed. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. His grandfather's words had landed like a hammer striking stone. Mr. Thornton's face paled. For the first time, he looked small. He glanced at the students around him, then back at Grandpa Bill. But there was nothing to say, because everything that needed to be said had already been spoken, a lesson for everyone. Grandpa Bill wasn't finished. He took another step forward, looking out at the gathered students, the ones who had whispered about Ethan, the ones who had laughed, the ones who had stood by silently. "And let this be a lesson to all of you," he said. No one moved. Never let someone else define your worth. His voice was calm, but it held a power that made the wind itself seem to pause. You stand tall, no matter where you come from, no matter what people say about you, no matter how much they try to make you feel like you don't belong. Because the truth is, you do. His eyes moved back to Ethan, and for the first time that day, Ethan didn't feel small. He felt seen. And then, somewhere in the crowd, a single clap broke the silence. Then another, and another. Until the entire school erupted in applause. It wasn't the sarcastic clapping Ethan had come to recognize in the hallways. It wasn't the empty politeness of students who just wanted to be on the right side of a moment. It was real. The sound of recognition, the sound of respect. And as the students clapped, some even cheering, Ethan felt something shift inside him, something lighter. Mr. Thornton, now visibly humbled, swallowed hard. He hesitated for a moment, then turned to face Ethan. His shoulders sagged slightly, as though he were carrying the weight of his own shame. He exhaled before speaking. "I was wrong," he admitted. His voice was quieter now, almost human. "And I am truly sorry." Ethan, standing straighter than ever, met his teacher's gaze. For the first time, he saw something in Mr. Thornton's eyes that hadn't been there before. Humility. And maybe, just maybe, a little bit of respect. "I don't need an apology," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I just need to be treated with respect." Mr. Thornton nodded. "You have my word." And from that day on, he did. Standing tall. As the commotion died down, Grandpa Bill turned to Ethan, giving him a small nod of approval. No words were needed. Ethan already knew what it meant. The lesson had been learned, not just by Mr. Thornton, but by the entire school. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Ethan stood by his grandfather, watching as the helicopter's rotors began spinning once again. Dust lifted into the air, the machine roaring to life. Grandpa Bill stepped toward the open door of the helicopter, then turned back one last time. "You did good today, kiddo," he said over the noise. "Real good." Ethan smiled. "Thanks, Grandpa." And as the helicopter lifted off, carrying his grandfather home, Ethan stood there watching it disappear into the horizon. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of standing out. For the first time, he wasn't ashamed of where he came from. Because today, he had learned something more valuable than anything in a textbook. Today, he had learned to stand tall. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Because sometimes, the best lessons in life aren't found in a classroom. They're found in the moments that make us stand tall.